it up on Facebook. Thank you. And we want to make sure Linda and Gary get to see it. We do this affectionately in memory of Vera and Stanley Marshall. Stanley sponsored a lecture or an educational event or a speaking event of some kind in memory of his wife, Vera, who truly loved learning and loved the temple. Stanley was a past president of the temple, really an amazing person. He was born in Iraq, made Aliyah to Israel, came to the United States, clearly solely to become president of Temple Sinai and start a series for all of us. He made Aliyah, he returned to Israel to be with his brother and passed away in Israel. He wanted to die in Israel. And I thought that given their love of experiences and learning and adult education and culture and their love of Israel, that this would be the perfect night right after we just came back from a mission with Jewish National Front USA, JNF-USA, to have this event. It would, and I sent a message to Linda saying, what do you think of this idea? And she said, perfect. She said, perfect. What a great tribute to her parents. Vera's yahrzeit is at the end of October. Stanley's yahrzeit was actually this past Shabbat. So it really is, the timing of this is perfect, and in his memory and in their memory, Zichronam Livracha. So I would like to invite up David Bone and Bob Stepansky and Barry Fritz, who were my traveling companions and incredibly tolerant of what's it like to travel with the rabbi. It's too many jokes are there. They could find out what I can do with an all-you-can-eat buffet in an Israeli hotel. And I'm going to simply let them speak to you, and I'm going to sit there with our cantor so I can see your faces as you address the congregation. So welcome and thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. Congratulations, Natalie, and good luck tomorrow. You're going to be great. So, I'm David Bone, first speaker. What I'd like to do is talk about two things: why I went, and one experience that I had there. And you're going to hear from each of us, and we're all going to talk about something a little bit different, and hopefully you'll get a sense of what it was like being in Israel for a week during a war. It was something. It's a little bittersweet for me being here tonight. I just stood and said Kaddish for my mother, who passed away 2 years ago. And there's other sadness that's tied in with this. On October 7th, Marlene and I, my wife of 43 years, please wave, Marlene and I were in my dad's room in the assisted living facility that he was in. And it was his last full day as a person alive on this earth. He actually passed away on the 8th, early in the morning on October 8th. And during that night of October 7th, Marlene and I spent many hours just being there in the room with him. And he was asleep, and it was almost over for him. And we had the TV on, trying to keep us a little bit of company. And CNN was on in the background. And we're watching CNN, and we're going, what's going on in Israel is absolutely terrible. It's horrible. We're getting these snippets of the war starting and some of the terrible reports that are coming out, but we're not getting the full picture. And it was just mind-boggling what was going on. It was very hard to understand because, as I said, my dad passed away the next morning, and the next week for me was a blur. I'll be honest, I really didn't have an opportunity to process what was going on in Israel for a while. But at the end of a week, I started to pay attention again and get back focused in terms of what was going on in Israel. And it was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. And I felt like I needed to do something. I said to Marlene, I have to do something. I have no idea what something is, but I have to do something. And the other thing I said to her was, when this is all over, we're going back to Israel. We had been there in 2010. We had a wonderful time. It was more of a tourist thing than a mission trip, but it was a wonderful experience, and I thought we would go back. We did other things. We made a donation to Magen David Adom, the Israeli Red Cross. We went to the rally at Lake Massapog, that many of the clergy in town were there. We came to meetings at the temple. We put up signs supporting Israel. That sign is still there in our front window, along with the blue ribbons that went up that same day. But it wasn't enough. For me, it wasn't enough. I felt like I needed to do something that I didn't know what it was, but I needed to do something. So we fast forward from October, end of October, to December. Middle of December, around the 15th, an email comes out from the temple. Rabbi Mesler, Joseph, is going to Israel on a trip, Jewish National Fund USA. Would any congregants, if they're interested in joining him, please, check it out, and he'd love to have some company if people wanted to go. My reaction to that was immediate. I said, he's not going alone. I'm going with him. And I am very glad that I did that I had the opportunity to share it with these two gentlemen and with the rabbi. It was a wonderful experience. So I looked at the description of the trip online on the JNF website. I liked what I saw, and I immediately put a deposit down. My thought was at the time that since the trip is scheduled for March, that the war would be over. It was in December, the war would be over, everything would be fine, we'd be recovering and all that. I was wrong. We were all wrong. It has not worked out that way. Oh, there's one other thing I forgot to mention. I didn't tell Marlene that I put the deposit down. I told her after the fact. I had mentioned that I was thinking about going, and then I just went ahead and put the deposit down and said, I'm going. And she was very supportive, a little worried, but very supportive. Many people were worried. I heard worry from everybody. It's not safe. You're going to get hurt. What are you doing? It's too dangerous. And my honest response was, I don't care. I'm going. There's 9.5 million people that live in the state of Israel, and they have to deal with this every single day. I can do it for a week. It's not that hard. It was an easy decision for me. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about something that happened on the trip that affected me. It was an interesting experience. A little bit about the trip itself. There were 150 people that were on this particular mission trip, organized by Jewish National Fund USA, as the rabbi said. These are people that came from all over the United States and Canada. There were Canadians on the trip as well. There were so many people that they broke us up into two groups. There were 75 people that stayed in Tel Aviv, where we were based in a hotel, and there were 75 other people that were based in Sde Boker to the south of Israel. There were just too many people to be handled in one place. And I'd add, there were people in the hotel who were displaced. There were people living in the same hotel on the same floor who were not at home. They had been, they've left their home behind. They've been evacuated, and they're staying in this hotel waiting for the opportunity to go home. As I said, I couldn't have been happier to be there with the rabbi and Barry and Bob. We had a very educational trip. Fun is the wrong word. We had a good trip. We had an interesting trip. I learned so much. It was so good to be able to help in such a small way during that time. So the time that we each have to speak is very limited. So let me just tell you about one day that we spent in a place called Talmei Eliyahu. It's a moshav. And my first question is, what's a moshav? I didn't really understand what a moshav was, so I've looked it up. Moshav is a cooperative community of farmers. It's kind of like a kibbutz in a lot of ways, but people have their own individual fields outside the central living area. Talmei Eliyahu is a gated community. There's a fence and a wall completely around it. There's very high security in that place. There were 300 people that lived there up until October 7th. And it's 3 miles from the border with Gaza. It was one of the first places that was attacked on October 7th. So the day that we went there, we left Tel Aviv early in the morning. We had a 2-hour bus drive. We got there and they immediately put us to work. Barry, Bob, they went off and built picnic tables for the community. A whole bunch of them. They did a fantastic job. It was really cool to come back. When we left, we saw some wood and some stain. And I came back and saw these beautiful benches and tables that were made. It was fantastic. The rabbi and I stuck together, and we went off to paint a bomb shelter. This bomb shelter was 2 stories tall. It was made out of the ugliest concrete you can think of. It looked terrible, and it needed a coat of paint. I started to think, it was a bomb shelter in somebody's front yard. These people are living with a bomb shelter in their front yard. This is something that people here in America, we don't think about that. That's not something that we have to deal with. So it was absolutely mind-boggling. So we got to work and we started painting. It was very eerie there. It was very quiet. This is a community of 300 people. There's nobody there. There were dogs, lots of dogs running around, and they looked well fed. I think they were being taken care of. And there were a few security people, but nobody else. It was dead quiet. So we're painting along, and at one point I remember Rabbi and I are painting away with our brushes and rollers, and this fellow rides up on a bike. And I'll describe him as an older gentleman, and I say that he's older than I am, so I know I'm old already. He rolls up on a bike, and he watches us for a few seconds, few minutes. He's sitting there, and we're wondering who he is and what he's doing there. And then he starts telling us what we're doing wrong. Typical Israeli reaction. You could do it better. Come on. And he watched us for a few minutes, and then off he went on his bike down the road, and we didn't see anybody else the rest of the time we were painting. So after we were done painting, we packed up our stuff. We walked back to the community center building for lunch and a short presentation by a couple of people. The first person we heard from was the head of security for the community, Talmei Eliyahu, and he told us what happened on October 7th there. It was a miracle. This community of 300 people, not one person inside the gate was killed or taken hostage. They did a wonderful job protecting it. They actually stacked some cars and trucks out in front of the gate, and they protected the place from, they estimate, about 80 terrorists that attacked that community. Many of them terrorists died. Those that didn't die ran away and moved on to somewhere else. There was only one death in the entire community, and that was somebody who was in their car who was outside of the gate. So it was kind of a miracle. We heard a lot from the security people. It really was very interesting. And I guess sort of the last thing that happened that affected me the most that day was this woman, older woman, out of nowhere got up and was called up to the front of the room and started speaking. And she told us her story. She was from Paris. She emigrated to Israel in the 1970s and made her life there. And she left Israel. She left Paris because of anti-Semitism that was building around her, and she didn't like it. And they followed a group to Israel, where she lived. And we got her story, and it was very interesting. And across the room, she points to a man, and she says, "Come over here." Who was it? It was Santa Claus. It was her husband. And we got the full story from him. It was just so nice to see. These two people stayed in their home. We asked them, well, why are you still here? Nobody else is here. The place is completely evacuated. This is our home. No one is going to make us leave. They can't scare us. We are not going anywhere. Which just, made my heart so warm. I was just blown away by their response and their situation. I would say that I really appreciated their bravery and their stubbornness. That they were not going to leave, and nothing was going to change that for them. And it was really uplifting. I really needed that. I'll end by saying I thought, for me, this trip was incredibly rewarding. It was a gut punch. It was eye-opening. It was sad. It was amazing. It was beautiful, all at the same time. And I would go back there in a minute, and I would encourage anybody that's even thinking about going, please go. Every single person that we talked to, without question, every single person that we talked to, soldiers and non-soldiers alike, said thank you. They appreciated the fact that people came to support them from America, from Canada, from around the world. And I will end it with that, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob Stepanski to continue our story.
Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. Everyone on this JNF mission experienced highs and lows. And I don't know if JNF did this on purpose, but I realize in a way, our highs and lows seem to parallel the lives of the Israelis. Let me explain. There were a lot of highs on this trip. We had some fun. We picked lemons. We built picnic tables, as you heard from David. We cooked Chicken schnitzel, Barry is the king of chicken schnitzel, mashed potatoes, and coleslaw for 500 IDF soldiers. We planted broccoli. These were our mornings, and it was a lot of fun. There was camaraderie and there was laughter. And the lows. In our afternoons and evenings, we were brought up close to the realities of the war, the hostages, and those killed on 10/7. We visited the Nova Festival site. We visited the IDF Southern Command Center and were told a horrific story about what happened on that military base when it was temporarily taken over by Hamas terrorists. We visited Soroka Hospital, which you'll hear more about from Barry, where hundreds of near-death victims were treated. These were emotional and destabilizing lows. And it seems like these highs and lows just permeate Israeli life. Some highs in Israel. Every morning we sat outside having breakfast, looking over the Mediterranean and watching people surf. We watched people play volleyball on the beach under the lights almost every night in Tel Aviv. I stayed a little bit after the mission, and I sipped coffee one afternoon at an outdoor cafe on David Ben-Gurion Boulevard and watched young couples pushing strollers with little kids down the street. It's fun, normal stuff. And there are lows. Every Israeli knows, and we spoke with a lot of Israelis, they know they are at war and that they are not completely safe. The collective anger and grief over the hostages is palpable. I got together with the daughter of a family friend who lives and works in Tel Aviv. She just moved apartments because she wanted a bedroom that was also a bomb shelter. Each day on the mission, when we were in the bus driver would tell us if we were entering a 30-second or a 15-second zone. That meant if we heard a siren, we had either 30 seconds or 15 seconds to find a safe place. This is what Israelis live with, highs and lows, every day. And we sort of experience that, our mornings and our afternoons. I've just chosen, beyond this, 2 experiences to share with you. We could talk, each of us, a long time, because a lot happened in this short period of time. And then I have 1 for extra credit, only if I have time. First, a Soroka Hospital story. Soroka Hospital is a level 1 trauma center. It's in Beersheba, which is in the northern Negev desert. And this is where many of the victims of 10/7, soldiers, civilians, were brought. And the head trauma surgeon spoke with us for about an hour. In the chaos of triaging bleeding people coming in on stretchers, soldiers, civilians, 1 near-death victim was brought in on a stretcher, and it became evident that this victim was a Hamas terrorist. What do you do? A surgical nurse told the trauma surgeon that she could not participate in this surgery. She'd have to take a pass. What would you do? The surgeon told the nurse that they were going to perform the surgery, and they could rationalize this surgery 1 of 3 ways. And he said, you can choose any one of these 3 ways to rationalize what we're about to do. And there's no judgment on our part, but we're going to perform the surgery. So rationale number 1, some people believe that if we can, we are obligated to save a life. You can cite scripture, you can cite a commandment that shall not kill, or you can rely upon your own morality. Some people believe this is the only and the right thing to do. Rationale number 2, surgeons always need more practice, especially on live patients. And remember that the hospital was in chaos. Although this was a trauma facility, they had never experienced anything like this. So everything else was shut down, childbirth areas, colonoscopies, elective surgery. So every surgeon became a trauma surgeon. So practice could be consequential. And practicing on this Hamas terrorist might result in a better outcome the next time they're operating on Israeli Jews. And rationale number 3, intelligence. What could be learned from this terrorist if he survived? And this, in fact, is what happened. They performed the surgery, the terrorist survived, and in a matter of days, the IDF interrogated this terrorist, and he provided valuable intelligence that led directly to the saving of IDF lives. What rationale would you have relied upon? I don't know, but these are the things they dealt with at Soroka Hospital. The second thing I'd like to talk about is my experience as an Israeli farmer. As I already mentioned, we spent hours on Monday picking lemons in a lemon orchard. And on the fourth day, many of us spent hours in the hot sun planting these tiny little broccoli seedlings in this wide open plowed field. One tiny seedling next to every other little hole in the drip irrigation that was already there in the land. Since 10/7, Israel has lost most of its immigrant farm labor. Thousands of agricultural workers from Thailand were flown back to Thailand by the Thai government. And Palestinians who had work permits to come into Israel to work the land are not coming anymore, and they're not trusted anymore. So there's practically no one left to harvest the crops. 90% of Israel's food production occurs in either the north, where many farms are abandoned now due to the rockets being sent by Hezbollah every day, or the south near Gaza. So food security is becoming an issue in Israel. If we had not picked the lemons that day, they would have rotted on the trees. That was page 3. And the soil. Sticking my finger in the ground to plant a tiny little broccoli seedling was like sticking your finger in the sand at the beach. And in between the rows of the lemon trees, which were not irrigated, it was just like concrete, solid, and I kept saying to myself, how could anything grow? The answer is drip irrigation, invented, by the way, by a Polish-Israeli inventor named Simcha Glass in 1959. Drip irrigation, fertilizer, hard work, and a commitment to the Jewish homeland. They've made the desert bloom, and I got to see that and experience that firsthand. It's a little different than just reading about it in a book. To quote Noah Tishby, nationhood is the modern manifestation of a basic human need, a connection to a land, and the need for self-determination and self-governance. In Israel, I had the opportunity to engage in making the desert bloom. How did it make me feel? I guess it made me feel a little bit like a Zionist in the land of the milk and honey. Am Yisrael Chai. And if I have extra credit later on, I'll tell one more story. Barry Fritz.
So, why did I want to go to Israel at this time? I've never been to Israel until now. And so when the rabbi had brought up this opportunity, I knew I needed to go. Being able to help out in such a time of need, while also getting an inside look into what they're enduring and how they're coping, was really an incredible experience. So while we were there were serious, solemn times, and there were inspirational, uplifting times. So I want to talk on each side of that. The first one is related to what Bob had brought up, the time we had with Dr. Perry at Soroka Hospital. And I'm gonna bring it back to us and ourselves here. During his talk, he focused primarily on how the hospital staff responded, likening their success of saving lives of people who made it to the hospital to how Boston hospitals dealt with the marathon bombing and the success that Boston hospitals had, where only a couple of people, only 3 people passed away. So I found it interesting that he made that connection. And it made me think about that day and the impact we can all have on the outcomes ourselves. And made me think about that day and the impact we can have on the outcomes for ourselves and others if we ever find ourselves in a situation requiring a response like that. We can sometimes trivialize the impact of an event like the marathon bombing. Not that many people died. It wasn't that bad, but it was bad. We were one variable away from a far worse outcome. 260 people were injured. 17 people lost limbs. Only 3 people passed away. The fact only 3 people died was not by chance. It was not just because we have many hospitals trained in advanced trauma response like in Israel. It was also because where the bombing happened, there were hundreds of people right there that had training to deal with a situation like this. Police, fire, EMTs, doctors and nurses who were volunteering for the day for the race, they were all there within feet of what happened. So what can we do? One step for us. We can be trained in active threat response. We can do that here. We do that every year. CPR, AED, and stop the bleed training. All of that is something we provide yearly. And it's also something you can get through the town and other sources, and I urge you to do so. You may never have to deal with a situation like that, but you also may be the reason you and others survive, just like on October 7th and on Patriots' Day that year. So on to a lighter topic. On the 3rd day, we had the opportunity to visit the Druze village of Julis, which is north of Haifa, and to make meals for the troops. We went to a restaurant called Nor. It's a Galilean Druze restaurant owned by a remarkable woman, Basma Hino. Her husband had served in the IDF years ago and was mortally injured in an attack. He lasted on life support for 12 years before he finally succumbed to his wounds. Basma had to find a way to support her family. So she moved to another village that she had not been in before. She opened up the restaurant in Nor, named after her son, and she made a way for her family. When the current conflict started and the north was mostly evacuated, she wanted to find a way to help out. So she approached the IDF and said, "I'd like to make meals for you. Can I help?" She thought maybe they'd want 40 meals. They said, "Oh yeah, we can use the help, 400. So she's like, how am I gonna do this? And even though she is Druze, she wanted to make sure that every meal that she supplied could be eaten by any soldier in the IDF. So she took the time to become kosher certified for her restaurant. The day we were there, troops were supposed to come and break bread with us, but Hezbollah had other ideas that day, and we had to package up everything that we made so it could be picked up by the troops and brought back to their bases along the border with Lebanon. Our work was what I would describe as a well-oiled chaos. Some of us were making mashed potatoes, some were making schnitzel, and some were working on the coleslaw and packaging and note writing. And it all worked out, and I'd like to say that we were told that we were, of all the groups that visited and helped out, the fastest at doing this work. So, very proud moment. When the soldiers came to pick up the meals, they all wanted to stay and talk and tell their stories, but because of everything going on, they didn't have that much time. You could see in their eyes that they just wanted to be there with us and spend time and talk. Some did, but most could not. One soldier who did not have time to talk to us made a video, and he sent it to us the next day, which was wonderful. To wrap up, it was a truly wonderful experience visiting Israel in this way, surpassing all of my expectations of what it would mean to me and how we would be welcomed by the people. Everyone we met had a story of loss, of displacement, of hardship, but at the same time, we heard of love, resilience, and camaraderie. The single biggest thing I took away from the experience was the deep, deep appreciation everyone had for our being there to help out and spend time with them. They are an island unto themselves, and to let them know they are not alone is so very important today and tomorrow. Thank you.
So I want to thank Barry and Bob and David and actually call them up here. And I want to take for a moment to be able to have you be able to ask have you ask them any questions that you want about the trip and about their experience. So if you could come on up, and I'll repeat your questions aloud if you have them, not only for the people in the room, but also for people who are joining us online. So, because if it doesn't get sent into a microphone, people at home can't hear it. So I'm gonna just lead off with a question, which is that now that you've come home and you're experiencing how the war is being talked about in the United States, and you're looking at different kinds of coverage and things like that, what are some of the disparities that you've seen between your personal experience versus what's being presented in the news? I didn't give them warning about this, so I have a lot of strong feelings and thoughts about this, and I'm just curious. But I'm going to try to do as little tonight about my thoughts, and really let you hear from your fellow congregants. So, thoughts or feelings about the way it's being presented in the news versus what your story was or your experience was.
Start. So primarily what we hear in the news now is the famine in Gaza, and the fact that so many innocent Gazans are losing their lives, and that, these are kind of my words, but, Israel's out of control, their response is disproportionate. We saw a country that was traumatized by the events of 10/7. I mean, this notion that the IDF, is infallible. So we saw a country where people think things will never be the same. And we heard a lot of things about Gaza that you don't hear in the news. And so I think, I'm trying to be, I think there are two sides to everything, but I think, in my opinion, what we hear in the news is pretty one-sided. We hear a lot also, just one last point, I'll let these guys talk, is that, our president, our Secretary of State, let's call for a ceasefire. We got to slow things down, and I think back, what was great about the Six-Day War in 1967? It took 6 days. This has been going on for 6 months, and I think a lot of the steps that are being taken in Israel are prolonging the war. Their effort to protect the citizens, the extraordinary restraint that they're being asked to take by our government. I think it's prolonging the mess that's over there.
I can add one thing. One thing that strikes me about all of the coverage, I agree with what Bob said. It's one-sided. The longer it goes on, the worse the lean gets. The anti-Israel press. I think Israel kind of has lost the public relations battle. For whatever reason, I don't know, they've just not been able to get their story out the way the other side has, and they've galvanized people. The other thing that strikes me is, much like has happened in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine is still happening. It's been 2 years. We don't hear about it hardly at all. The same thing with the hostages. There are 135, 134 people, different numbers. There are people that are being held hostages. Either they're alive or their remains are being held by the terrorists, and they don't get. It's like it doesn't matter. It's not even part of the equation. When that was an important part of what started this whole thing in the first place, and it's very frustrating to me. It's very aggravating, annoying, mind-boggling that those poor people are suffering, their families are suffering, and those people are suffering the way they are.
Questions from the congregation? Anybody have anything? Yes, Jim? Bob, Jim wants to know Bob Stepanski's extra credit story.
I feel like I'm back in Hebrew school where we get credit
You
for coming to the
well,
service.
I also
and-
just know that you brought a lot of family with you, and I told you that if you brought this much family, I was going to call you to the Torah to do your bar mitzvah portion. But tell us your extra credit story.
And one last response to Rabbi's prior question, I'll go out on a limb a little bit. You don't hear certain stories like this. Go to YouTube and look for Shira Cohen. She was one of the hostages who was released after 55 days. Shira was in one of the moshavs or kibbutzim nearby. She was put on a motorcycle with a Hamas terrorist in the front and a Hamas terrorist in the back, and they drove her into Gaza. She was pulled off that motorcycle by Palestinians, not Hamas, and she was beaten. People in the street came out and beat her. She had to be saved by the two Hamas terrorists because they wanted her alive as a hostage in the tunnels. So I struggle a lot today, and I don't want to get real political. I don't want innocent Palestinians being hurt, but we heard a lot of stories that suggest to me that it's very difficult to identify an innocent Palestinian. They're there, but it's not all 2 million of them. Anyway, my special credit story is has anyone here heard of the IDF-SIU? Yeah, I didn't think so. So IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces, and SIU stands for Special in Uniform. Sandy, yeah, I'm not surprised. The IDF is the only military in the world that has a special unit for those young people on the spectrum or otherwise challenged verbally or mentally. So there's a special unit in the IDF for these folks, and they found that some of them have the ability to interpret data in ways that are not as evident to other people. So whether they're looking at photographs of the ground or et cetera, but they have certain analytical skills that others don't have. And our exposure to the SIU was on Tuesday night. That's when we went to the Southern Command military base. And again, it's another one of those juxtapositions where a horrific event occurred just a matter of months ago. And so there were 60 of us there that night, and probably 24 soldiers. And they brought out a unit from the SIU. These were all singers, and they put on a concert for us. So there was like loud, background music, and these soldiers in uniform, they sang, and they were clearly on the spectrum, but it says something, I think, about the IDF. And again, in the middle of all this stuff going on, we had a barbecue, we socialized with these soldiers, and we were entertained by this special unit of the IDF. So the SIU, I think, is something really special, and I think it says something about Israel.
I'd like to add one thing to that.
Yeah, please.
So in Israel, everybody has compulsory service. This is the norm. You're expected, and many want to serve. And that goes to people with special needs as well. And for a long time, they couldn't. And that was a negative impact to them emotionally and mentally. They wanted to help as well. So the formation of this group helped both the military and the people. So, thank you.
Oh, that's it. Marlene's question was, what percentage of our group, was there a gender breakdown in the volunteers with JNF-USA?
About half and half.
I thought it was about half and half. Yeah, it's about half and half. So what I'm going to say is we're going to conclude, and you can continue to ask them questions. We're going to have Kiddush in the foyer, and then we're going to go into the social hall for the oneg. I'm going to conclude with, I'm looking at dates to go back. So JNF-USA is running more and more missions, and I will get back to you after Pesach with some times that maybe we can run another mission. And please either come with me or go without me. Go on a date that works for you. So everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Let's join in the foyer for Kiddush. Thank you, everybody.